Hey, I wanted to talk briefly about the recent load of videos put out about dark matter. A lot of people are shocked that he holds to quite bigoted views, and I'm actually not that shocked by this. I sort of view dark matter the same way that I view Seth MacFarlane or Trey Stone and Matt Parker, in that they make commentary on nuance subjects that can ultimately be reduced down to brief animated videos that are basically more about presenting jokes than they are about having an actual discussion. And while I don't think that's necessarily a huge problem, I do think that it gets a bit awkward when people seem to treat Family Guy or South Park or dark matter videos as if they're an actual academic authority. Like, you know, animation is good for videos. I wish I could do animation, and I had the production values that dark matter does. I would kind of maybe describe what Minute Physics, I don't really watch many of their videos, but Minute Physics basically sort of draws what they're talking about while explaining it. And I would like a channel that discussed actual theology using animations maybe, but you know, there are some points made in the dark matter videos that are interesting and engaging, and I'm not that bothered that they don't really explore it a lot, but at the same time, if you make videos that mock concepts without any hint of sort of academia surrounding it, because ultimately it's all about your jokes and how silly you can make something seem, then you enforce an idea that there is no theological answer to these questions. So, while I do think that a lot of dark matter's criticisms of religion are valid, at the same time I feel like the way he puts them across will make it look to his fans and his critics like he is dismissing the theology and the academia that actually does deal with these criticisms. So it really doesn't surprise me very much that he would have these same attitudes towards feminism or the LGBTQ plus community, because, you know, I mean, ultimately that's sort of the entire point of YouTube atheists, to say things loudly and confidently without much appreciation for nuance, and convince people to accept what they're saying without critically analysing it, in the sense that they reduce their competition to basically being something that's not even worth debating. And I think this is especially the case with dark matter. You know, dark matter doesn't exactly debate theism, so I don't think that it's accurate to portray him as some beacon of reason that is surprisingly corrupted. But I didn't really want to talk about dark matter that much. I just wanted to say that on it because I've heard a lot of people saying that they're shocked or surprised that dark matter said these things. I don't really know why. What I wanted to talk about is Captain Andy made a video where he was talking about transphobia and why it is that a lot of transgender people use so many labels to describe themselves. I shouldn't just say transgender. Transgender or queer gender or plus gender people use all of these labels, and obviously the argument given is that because there's lots of things that define them, you know, it was basically the upshot of the argument Andy gave. He made a more cogent argument, but I'm just taking this because this is kind of what I'm going to be commenting on mostly. because a lot of people do have a criticism of this, and the criticism is, for example, if you define yourself as polyamorous and you make that part of sort of your gender orientation or your sexual orientation, or if you define yourself, it is the example given in the video as kinky, and that you define that as part of your sexual orientation, then the question that a lot of people have is, well, straight, white, cisgender males can be kinky, they can be polyamorous, they can do all sorts of sexual things that are within the realms of being straight and cisgendered, but at the same time might be unique. And the argument is, well, I can identify, I'll use myself as an example of someone arguing this point, although I will not be arguing it, I'll be refuting it, hopefully. I can identify myself as heterosexual and cisgendered, and I do not need to add on to that any qualifiers about the particular sex I'm into, or with whom I'm likely to have sex, or, you know, what my favourite colour is, anything like that. It's my favourite brand of condoms. That's sort of the argument. And I'm kind of mocking the point that's being addressed in the manner that I imagine someone making the argument would. I don't really mean to be disparaging when I say favourite colour, whatever. I'm just pointing out that that is the argument. You know, why can't I, or why is it reasonable for a transgender person to add loads of qualifiers to their gender orientation when it would be seen as unreasonable, and I would personally not, and it wouldn't be expected of me that I would add all of those qualifiers to my gender orientation. And I think the issue here is it's misunderstanding the point, and it's sort of something that, again, Captain Andy hints at, which is the fact that cisgendered heterosexuality is the norm, and therefore you don't need to think about it. So, you know, you can just, there's almost no point in me saying I'm cisgendered heterosexual, apart from when having discussions about those specific things. Whereas if you're transgender, or if you're homosexual, or asexual, sorry, again, I'm not being completely inclusive, so apologies to people who identify as neither homosexual, heterosexual, cissexual, or transsexual. Transgender, sorry. I'm awful. But, you know, because it's implied, you, firstly, I think anything within that is itself implied. And secondly, anything within that can be regarded not as a part of someone's gender orientation, because their gender orientation is implied. So, if I say, for example, I'm into kinky sex, then that doesn't need to be part of my gender identity, because, or my sexual orientation, because my gender identity and my sexual orientation are sort of the default, and they're already presumed, and therefore I do not need to relate them in any sense to my gender or sexual orientation. Whereas if you are transgender, or I'm going to say, if you're not cisgendered and you're not heterosexual, then you do have to relate every aspect of how you identify your gender, or how you identify your sexual preference, to your overarching identity, and therefore it makes more sense for you to say that you have this sexual preference and that includes blah 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 blah. So that is why it is more reasonable for a transgender person to use all sorts of qualifiers as labels that they identify with, whereas it's not as reasonable for someone who is part of the default gender identity and default sexual orientation to use qualifiers and labels to identify all of the things that they're interested in, because they do not really identify themselves at all in any sense by what they're into, or their gender identity or sexual orientation. I can tell you that I might identify myself as a man. That might be a key part of my identity, but the fact that I identify with my physiological sex is not something I'm going to identify myself by, because it's something I'm very used to. And the fact that I'm attracted to members of the opposite sex is again not something I'd identify by, because it's almost, as someone who is heterosexual and cisgendered, who lives in a society where the majority of people I interact with are heterosexual and cisgendered, on a subconscious level, identifying myself as heterosexual and cisgendered is almost like identifying myself as a human being, because our culture is so heteronormative and cisnormative that it's implied just by the fact that you're a person that you would fall into the categories that the majority of people fall into, and I do not think that's a good thing. It might be an inevitable thing. I think it can certainly be something that can be mitigated to make it less the case that you have to feel completely other if you're not cisgendered or heterosexual. I mean, I guess that goes without saying. If you've seen anything I've ever made or inferred from what I've said so far in this video, I do care about social justice, blah 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 blah. So really this was just supposed to be that argument and why I don't find it convincing.